Hey, welcome back to STRonomics. I'm glad that you guys are here. I'm glad that my friend Kenny Bedwell has joined me today, as always. How's everything going, Kenny?
Good. Good. Just another day, another dollar, right?
Right. Hey, I want to talk about underwriting today and kind of not just like performa underwriting, but kind of going through the whole process, right? I mean, we started BK Hot Picks together a few years ago. You're now probably the top property finder in the industry. I'm probably do three to five for clients a month. I do my own. And things have changed. At least for me, they've changed. I assume your process has kind of changed in how you're underwriting. And I don't necessarily know that, at least for me, that's changed in how I look for properties. It definitely is where I'm looking for properties. But when I do get to the actual performa underwriting process, I do approach that a little bit differently today. And I'm sure you get a lot of questions as I do about this. So I'm going to let you lead. Why don't you kind of just start walking everybody through your kind of identification and underwriting process?
Oh, identification.
Well,
Okay.
that's part of the underwriting, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's like that's a topic in and of itself. Okay. So
We got 20 minutes, so Cliff Notes version.
I know, right? So first, I'll circle back to identification, but with underwriting, there are three main pieces that people can mess up. So the three main pieces are number one, understanding what your true debt service is, meaning like I guess underwriting it
Let's
contains
define debt service. What does that mean?
your mortgage payment. So if you take out a loan, what's your interest rate, what's your down payment, what are the terms, the amortization of that loan, like what are all the details that you're gonna have to pay out for that?
Hold on, you mean there's different amortization schedules?
Yeah, there can be.
Like every
So
fucking bank is actually could be a little bit different. Most people don't know that.
right, and people don't ask that either. So you got to look at that stuff. That's probably the easiest and most black and white one because it is here. It is, But you'd be surprised how many people I see it all the time. I like pull up someone's performa and I'm like, where are you getting this interest rate of 5.5%? And they're like, oh, I didn't change that. And I was like, well, you should change that to the right number because it's going to impact your return on investment, your cash flow. So that's a big piece. The second piece is your obviously your expenses and estimating expenses correctly. Here, listen to this. We have a client who just found this awesome property in Michigan, South Haven, Michigan. It was listed for 650. Okay. They contacted the county assessor's office in taxes for the $650,000 property is going to go from, I think they're paying like $6,000 or $7,000 a year, which is still a lot for a $650,000 property, to $22,000 a year. I'm like, what? That can't be real. But they called, they got it, they asked the people and everything and they double checked. And sure enough, that's huge on a property like that. That kills the cash flow. So the cash flow is expected to be like around 25 to 30. Now it's down to 8. And so people aren't the expenses and estimating your expenses appropriately is a critical piece of underwriting. I can't tell you how many times people are like, I'm buying this $1 million property and it's going to grow somewhere between like 120 and 150. And I'm like, well, you better hope it grosses 150 because if it grosses 120, you're breaking even or you're going to lose money.
I think there's three major expenses that people don't factor in, especially if they're buying remotely. Number one is what you just said, property tax adjustment. Number two is insurance. And number three is travel cost, especially if you're going and staging and doing everything remotely, right? And I always have to remind Bria, that's my wife who does the design and everything. And we were out there, I was in Montana last week as we're setting up, Kenny. And I'm looking at her spreadsheet and I'm like, hey, don't forget to add your airfare, my airfare. I had to fly Chris out to, do drone work and video. And then I also paid, I think it was $1,800 to my local photographer. So, I mean, that's kind of the 4B is all those additional expenses. And I agree with you that in the underwriting process, everybody thinks when they have my performa, your performa, whoever's it is, it's just the tool. You still have to have good data going into it. And I think it's the overall expenses that people get wrong. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yes, I do. So I mean, it's, we have some rough rules of thumb. I think John Hodge was kind of like the first one to really come out and say like, this is, 35% of your gross revenue at minimum should be dedicated towards your expenses, which doesn't include your debt service. My properties sit around 40 to 44% on average, depending on the property. And so I see a lot of people, we run the performance, we look at the percentage, it's like in the 20s. And I'm like, you're missing something. It's not just this magical, oh, wow, like this is such a crazy good deal. There's going to be expenses here. But that is a huge piece of underwriting that people mess up all the time. That's probably the most common one, actually, that people underestimate are your expenses.
I mean, you look at, I remember when I went into Banner Elk for the first time and I didn't budget snow plowing. I didn't even think about that.
Oh, yeah.
When I went down to the beach for the very first time, I didn't understand, the termite bond that I had to put into place. First year at Banner Elk cost me like almost $4,000 in snow plowing. Termite bond, it's not ridiculous, but it's like 1,100 to 1,200 bucks. It wasn't in my pro forma. I didn't know to expect that. And those are the things that people typically won't go back and add in when they find out about it. You know what I mean? So I think the biggest mistake, Kenny, is people lie to themselves to make the deal look good, consciously and subconsciously when they're looking at the expenses and the revenue. Oh, I'm a 90 percenter when you're really a 75% percentile host, right? Or I'm a 90 percenter when I'm a 50 percentile host. I think you have to be totally realistic. And the biggest piece of advice that I will give to you guys that are underwriting, I won't even say for the very first time. If you're just underwriting your 5th or your 10th deal, you don't have enough experience. You really need to be diligent and do underestimate revenue by 10% and overestimate your expenses by 10%. You need that 20% delta in the middle.
Yeah, which that's the last point there. So we got debt service, expenses, and then revenue is the last piece. Estimating revenue, people mess up all the time. They overestimate, and oh, my property, based off of what a current, maybe the property is already a short term rental. They assume based off what expectations, based on what the property previously did, versus oh, well, I can push the revenue more. Rarely does that actually happen, believe it or not, nowadays. Oh, and that's a scary thing. So
I think the other thing is people just run one pro forma. So Kenny opened up and mentioned like about banking and that you have, you can do a 15-year note, you can do a 20-year note, you can get a 25 these days, 30. You can even do like interest only 40-year AMs on a 30-year note. There's a lot of options, and all of that's going to affect, the principal and interest amortization schedule within that loan, right? So one of the things that I think is super important is that you're running a good, better, best pro forma on every line of banking. So if you're looking at a 20-year commercial, then run good, better, best scenario on that. If you're looking at a 30-year Fannie Freddie, run good, better, best on that. You're looking at an interest only on a 40-year, which is going to convert to a 30-year, do a good, better, best. Now, if you underestimate by 10% on your revenue, overestimate on expenses by 10%, you create that 20% delta in the middle. If your good scenario and the good, better, and best is not profitable with that 20% delta, you walk away from the fucking deal. If that good, so you have good, better, best, you could be 100 grand in revenue on good, you could be 115 on better and 130 on best. But if you're not profitable with that 20% delta on the good, you should walk away. Period. Don't lie to yourself. That's the biggest problem, Kenny, is that I've done it too. I've talked myself into deals. I'll give another shout out to John the Bank Whisperer Hodge. He created a rule in the mastermind. When him and I were reviewing performas 2.5 years ago, no stories allowed, right? We don't want just send the performa. We're going to look straight at the numbers. And that really starts from within to where because every deal we do is emotional, everyone. There's no way to be 100% financially driven. We have to remove as much of that emotion as we can. I'm the same way. I mean, I only invest in places that I want to spend part of my retirement, right? There's a reason I never invested into Hot Springs, Arkansas. That's the land of John Hodge. He loves it. And it surprises me because he's a pretty bougie dude driving these Lamborghinis and Ferraris. He's got a nice house, all that type of stuff. But that's just a town that didn't jive with me. I could have made a lot of money there, Kenny, but I didn't go because I knew I wouldn't give it my full effort. And I think we transcend those emotions into our performas, and people eke up those numbers a little bit. Hey, STR Insights at 75th percentile says it's 94,000. I think I can do 105. I need 105 to make this work. And then they put 105 into their performa. And then you're calling me and Kenny a year later to bail you out because you're not cash flowing, and you bought at 8.5% and you don't have options. So I think the biggest thing for me is you got to be honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And doing the scenarios, another common mistake I see with that, like running a good, better, best, the range is too wide.
You mean the good's going to be 100 grand and the best is 200 grand?
Exactly. Oh man, I see it all the time. They're like, well, like, and I'm like, yeah, but this isn't really, realistic. You know what I mean? Like you're covering too wide of a space, which means you don't really feel confident in your numbers to begin with.
Yeah, but Kenny, if I add the mod pool and put in a pickleball court, I should be able to take that average property, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, that's going to do 95,000 and do 250K.
I mean, based on what? That's like,
Based based on
yeah,
I think I can.
yep, yep, yeah. That's yeah. I
I have
mean,
not seen a property that you can actually double revenue in all the properties that I've looked at. Like if you redesign, I mean, maybe adding a pool in some markets, like if you could get one of those unicorns in downtown Charleston or something like that. But as a whole, it's almost impossible to be able to double your revenue. Almost impossible, right? But yet you're right. We see these performers that go from 100 to 175,000. That may not be double, but they're also not going to put 250,000 into it to put in a pool and a pickleball court and all that other stuff. That kind of goes back to that reality. I think they're trying to talk themselves into the deal because they love the property emotionally.
yeah. I mean, that's interesting about the double the revenue. The property is already underperforming, and it could be like, but the realm of possibility and potential. I think you're right. But it does come to you're going to have to spend money to try to like push it higher, right?
Yeah,
And there's
so let
diminishing
me
return.
interject here, cuz do you remember when I bought the Stillwater River property?
And what?
The Montana property?
Yeah,
$98,000 is what you told me that thing would do on $1 million investment. That's going to be the first property in my first full year of renting it that I'm super close to breaking 200,000. Now, because of what we talked about in the previous podcast, I'm probably going to do it because of those amenities that I spent to do it. But I spent $35,000 in upgrading and renovating bathrooms in the master suite and that type of stuff, right? Then I went in and I spent 7 grand to add on a deck, and I added a $10,000 hot tub and a $7,500 barrel sauna. Then about 5 months later, I added on another deck and I added on a 15 foot geodome. That was about 22,000, right? That's after standard design and furnishing and everything else, inside that market. But here's the other thing that people don't understand. I've spent almost $4,000 in Facebook ads, as well. That's been my advertising budget for that. Not during the ultra peak season, not during the summer, but now in the off season and in the off season leading into the summer. I'm at like $188,000 on the books for that property. And just out of sheer grit and determination, I've got to break 200 to where it'll be the first property ever that I've owned to double the 90th percentile projections, right? Ever. I think people don't understand. You have to have that potential ahead of time. And what I'm talking about is when people come to us, they bought that crappy property in Wares Valley, and they think that if they, just have us redesign it or add whatever, that it's going to go from negative cash flow of $3,000 a month to positive $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And that is almost every time not realistic. Would you agree with that? So that's why this process is so critical to pick the right market, pick the right property, and underwrite it appropriately. I think people make the mistake when they underwrite because they probably don't, they might not have known how to underwrite. It's just recently within the last year and a half that John and me and you and Ryan and these people have been giving their performers away, for people to be able to use them to make more informed, decisions. And I think without that, people have had a crutch that they've had to balance themselves on because the performa, man, it mitigates risk if you do it correctly.
well, and then another thing too is I think a lot of people, there's still a lot of influencers out there and old videos too that people go watch on YouTube where they're talking about, look, the property management is doing this. Like you can do better than that if you're just a good host, you'll make more money. Like, and it's not based off of anything logical or actual numbers. It's based purely on like, hey, look, during this season in 2021, we were doing better than property management because they weren't taking care of the places. right? But as markets shift, our strategies on how we evaluate, how we analyze and underwrite deals has to evolve as well. And that is an antiquated way of underwriting anything. It's not even underwriting, it's making a stupid assumption, right? So,
Well, I think there's a couple of things that I just want to touch on briefly that I take into consideration either way more today or I didn't take into consideration previously. And there's four kind of pillars that I look at when I'm underwriting. Number one, obviously, is cash flow. Number two is going to be appreciation. And that's something that I never, in the gold rush, I never looked at, never even considered. It was just straight cash flow. You remember the very first STR Wealth Conference, 30% cash on cash, don't settle for less. That was the wristbands, the t shirts, everything. It was everywhere. And then everything dramatically started to shift, within about 2 or 3 months after that conference. So cash flow appreciation. Then a lot of people would think tax benefits would be number three. For me, that's number four. And tax benefits are a part of the equation. That goes what I call into page 2 of the pro forma. But the third one's very important. And you touched on this earlier, Kenny. It's debt paydown. And when I started my STR investing career, about the first 7 or 8 properties I did were on commercial loans, 20-year amortizations, all 20% down or higher. And there's a lot of people that are going in and doing 30-year, 40 years interest only, doing 10% downs, and you literally are not paying down debt. So part of the strategy as I'm running the amortization is I also look at, because I know that it's very rare that I will own a property for probably more than 5 years because I'm looking to reposition out as quickly as I can. So if I can do a shorter term loan, 15, 20 years, then if I can accelerate my payments and do 2 payments a month as opposed to 1 payment, and then reinvest principal to where I can accelerate that debt pay down, I create that delta when I do my return on equity audit. And if my equity outpaces my cash flow return, then it's time to reposition. And that's how you can level up. But you got to factor in all four of those, because if you're going to net $40,000 in year number one, and you can get a $40,000 benefit in your cost segregation study at 60% this year and 40% next year, if you're going to hold longer than 3 to 5 years, it's probably still going to be a good investment, because then you get to keep that rental income, you get to keep that cash to refill your investing coffers, your investing kitty, whatever you want to call it, to be able to make that next purchase. And I think that's something that's really important for me. I'm not just looking at cash flow in that pro forma. I'm not just looking at the debt service, the DSCR coverage ratio, percentage. I'm looking at all of these factors to look at the next move, which would be the second one, and then the third one down the line. So I'm strategically planning in my underwriting process of the property that's right in front of me of what I'm going to do with the next one and the next one, from my debt to income ratio, my DTI, from my credit score, from my cash on hand, from my cash flow, to rebuild the money that I'm putting into this property. There's a reason that I just closed on a $3 million property 6 weeks ago, and I'm closing Monday in less than a week on a $569,000 property. Because as I'm going through that setup process, Kenny, I had $150,000 budgeted, which was my seller credit I got. I'm going to end up probably close to $100,000 over budget by the time I'm done. 100 grand over budget, which never happens ever. But it's so massive, and there was things that weren't identified in the underwriting process, and by inspectors and that type of stuff, that is costing me money that was not anticipated. So now I've got to replenish that additional 100 grand. When I found this property for 579, I had enough cash to be able to purchase it. But if that would have been $1 million property or a $1.3 million property, I wasn't ready. Does that make sense?
yeah.
So, and that's kind of having that wherewithal to look farther down the road than just the 10 feet right in front of you, to think about deal 2 and deal 3. And a lot of you say, well, Bill, you have the means to be able to do that. That's not the point. The point is, it's even more important when you don't, when you're just getting started and you only have $100,000 or $200,000 in investable cash, or even in your life savings, to make sure that you're buying and you're going to have room to be able to layer and stack and understand how you're going to replenish to be able to do the next deal.
Right. Yeah. No, I really like that. I think that's really hard for a lot of people to do. Like, not to say like you can't
You have
do
to
it,
learn
like,
it.
but
Most of us
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
how to
no,
do
that's
that.
exactly it. Like, I hear people, yeah, I sit when I sit down with people, especially on their first ones, I'm like, okay, well, what's the plan here? what's the long term, what's the big picture, where are you trying to take this? Is it just one property, two, like what? And I'm shocked by how many people are like, well, maybe they have like a rough plan, but they don't know how to get there. They don't see the vision.
Dude, it goes, what's the very first thing you did when you joined my mastermind? Very first thing.
Yeah, the life goals or the life
The
planning.
life plan. The life plan, you can't build an investing plan if you don't have the life plan. You got to have you have to have both side by side. What's the first things that you ask people when they call you to property find for them?
Why are you doing this?
And then how many times do you have to ask that? No, tell me, not that's not why you're doing this.
Yeah, no,
Well,
yeah,
Kenny,
because they all say it's
I
to
want to
make
have
money.
3 properties. I want to have 5 properties. Well, what's the result of having those 3 or 5 properties? Oh, you want to make $200,000 a year in net income. Okay. Well, what are you going to do with that $200,000 in net income? We've got to go layers deeper and deeper to really, as Hank Norman says, find the why before the why,
Right,
because the why is never the right answer.
right, yeah.
Awesome. Good episode, Kenny.
Great episode, Bill.
Hey, what do you guys think about that episode? If you liked it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode, because we got even better ones coming down the pipeline next week.
And if you didn't like it, don't just
Still hit the subscribe button
just
so
hit the
you'll see a
subscribe
better
button.
episode next time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great day. Happy hosting.